welcome back to the Chasing Common Ground podcast, which I have said many times has been rebranded from the Lifestyle Chase podcast. Now, today I am quite excited to have, for the first time ever, Mr. Bryce MacArthur. Did I get your last name right?
You did. You crushed it.
Excellent. It's such a fancy last name too. Like, what's the origin of that?
So my dad was a foster child, but he was adopted by the MacArthur family, so it's a Scottish last name.
Ah, I like it. I like it. I've got a little
Yeah,
bit of Scottish in me as well.
yeah.
Um, Now, I want to get your origin story,
Mm.
but the most interesting moments of it. So, like, what inspired you to go into the industry, and what were like two of the things that didn't go the way that you had planned them to go?
Okay, so are you looking for the whole thing?
I mean, as much as you'd like to share, but I also
Sure.
want to hear like the really good parts.
Yeah, yeah, no, of course. So I got into fitness probably about like myself probably about 12 years ago, probably coming up on 13 years now. So I started in high school, but we inherited some equipment from some family members, and I was just picking up working out kind of as like a hobby at the time. So, the old classic style like dungeon workouts, like metal plates. We had like this really old school like lat pull down that flipped over into like a tricep push down. Um, it was cool at the time, right? And then played music, just whatever. Had dumbbell rack and everything. So got into that, and then I'd say what kind of drew me to want to be a trainer though was I had this friend at the time. We were really good friends, and he had issues like myself. He dealt with some depression. He had a challenging childhood, and he had some stuff with his family at home too. So for him, I got him introduced into training, and he ended up losing about 100 pounds. I didn't obviously do that for him, but he had told me countless times that I was the one that provided some structure for him and guided him and given him some direction. And keep in mind, at this time, I didn't have any formal education. I was just a guy that had looked up a lot of stuff online, messed up quite a few times through trial and error, made my mistakes, but um, I was passionate and I was consistent, right? I think that's how it kind of always begins and how it starts. So when I spoke to him, I was like, okay, well, I was honored. I didn't really know what to think, but then it was that feeling, I think, of like knowing that you had that big of an impact on somebody where they took it upon themselves to change their entire life, right? And I think from then that was like my moment where I knew that I wanted to pursue training. I obviously had some after that had some periods of time where I had some self-doubt. So we'll talk about that too. Everybody talks about training being this thing where it's like, oh, you can't be a personal trainer. Like that's a part-time thing, right? Or like no one actually stays in personal training long term. So when you hear it enough, you believe that and you're like, okay, well, yeah, I guess maybe what am I thinking, right? So I ended up having a right out of high school, I ended up getting the opportunity to work at a electrical company doing like residential electrical stuff. I did that for not super long, maybe about 3, 4 months. And then I kind of had like a moment, and I was talking to one of my like mentors at the time. So I think he was like a third year, going into his fourth. And I was like, hey, can I run something by you? And he's like, oh yeah, of course. And I was like, hey, like I really want to pursue training. I was like, because I would, even when I was working this job, we were working 40, 50 hours a week of like labor. I was still going after work to the gym. I was still, planning my meals, going to the gym. It was still a consistent thing. So then I told him, I was like, hey, I kind of want to pursue personal training. And he was like, why don't you? So I think at that moment I was like, I I guess what's technically holding me back. And I think for me it was I was going to this job, and what was lacking for me was the fulfillment. So I was making okay money. It was something that I could probably grow into and have some job security with. And funny enough, the day that I wanted to quit, um, they offered me my book. So my boss at the time was like, "Hey, here's your blue book." He's like, "We want you to like do your apprenticeship here with us." And I was like, "Hey, I gotta kindly decline. Um, and I quit that day. No job in mind, no job at all. And then I went home. This is when I was home with my parents. They're like, "How's work today?" I quit my job. They were very unimpressed. I'm not going to say to what detail that how impressed they were, but they were very unimpressed. They're like, "How dare you quit with no job? How dare you just like quit the day of? That's so rude," and everything. They gave me a whole, they scolded me for it. And like to this day, like zero regrets. Maybe I wish that I gave somebody that person more time, right? Because you should give your employer more time. But um, I don't regret it whatsoever because that was when I had actually started working towards something that I wanted to do. And that led me to doing like an online course at the time that I was wanting to do. And then I got working at a local gym in Spruce Grove. That area is kind of where I'm from. So I was working at a local gym there, front desk. And then, yeah, gone to Nate at 20 in 2017, did the Nate program, and then been training in person online since 2019.
That's awesome. And I love that story and the fact that you kind of had that moment where you're like looking for that sense of purpose in the work that you did and like how you lived your life, because that's very relatable for me. So I kind of want to know because like you and I both attended the Dr. Pat Davidson event in person, the seminar.
Hmm.
And I noticed that you had a lot of attention to detail. And I'm kind of curious, what are the things that stand out when you're seeking out continuing education? Like what resonates with you? What teaching styles stand out? What personalities of different mentors stand out to you?
So I would say that since I've finished school, obviously the type of education that I'm drawn to has probably changed. But what I look for is people that are really passionate, because you can tell when somebody is passionate about what they're teaching and that they truly love what they're teaching. And I think that speaks volumes about the education that they're pushing out, but also that they genuinely enjoy their job, which I think is very, very important because I've seen the opposite end of it too, where it's monotone, it's boring, and you can tell that there's not much engagement and they're not overly like invested in what they're trying to teach. And maybe they don't even believe in what they're trying to teach, right? So I think passion oftentimes will reinforce their beliefs in what they're trying to teach. And for me, like I've had a lot of injuries in the past. So I did powerlifting for a while and I dealt with sorry, like recurring shoulder issues, hip issues, knee issues. And I got to a point where I was frustrated. I was constantly working through these injuries. So then I pulled back from powerlifting, and I think that was when my attention to detail kind of started working, was when I had these movement issues and I wanted to try to work through them myself. And as soon as I saw these things clear up, I realized like, oh wow, like you could actually improve your quality of life drastically with just moving better, better programming, focusing on recovery, focusing on improving movement mechanics, addressing movement discrepancies or issues. So that was when I really dove into it. And I've been working with Eric Bugera for probably a bit over 3 years now. So he's been my coach for a long time. So he has quite an attention to detail. So um, I lean into that hard, and him and I talk almost every day about something. So I would say, yeah, that was probably the moment for me when I realized that I wanted to be a coach that cares, a coach that's passionate, but then also a coach that has that attention to detail and like really wants to make a big impact on them, whether it's like the training side of things, whether it's, caring about them to the point where I'm sitting them down and talking with them about whatever is going on, whatever they want to talk about, right? Like I think those things all tie in, right? If somebody comes in, you can tell by physical traits that how they're doing that day, and I think it's just a matter of meeting them where they're at. And I think that that kind of makes a good coach from a bad coach, and that makes somebody stand out. So for me, yeah, I think it's just a matter of trying to continuously push the standard more and make sure that I'm doing my best to ensure that the clients gain the best service, because I've seen the opposite end of it too, where you have trainers that aren't giving as much attention to detail and don't care as much, and their clients aren't as happy.
Hmm. I mean, one thing that stood out to me as you're sort of like describing all the things that resonate with you is the passion. And even for myself, when I think about passion, I think about not only with like the conviction and what they're saying and like how enthusiastic they are about it, but also in just like the decisions that they're making with their time. And it can kind of go in two directions. So one direction being that they are sort of they're building their life around their pursuit to better themselves. So when we see people who've been in the industry a while and then all of a sudden they're like, I'm gonna compete. I'm gonna compete in bodybuilding, or I'm gonna compete in jujitsu or powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting. Like there's so many different directions we can go with competition. But just when they just decide that they're gonna do it. And it's not necessarily to prove themselves to somebody else, it's more to prove themselves to themselves. And then the other facet that kind of stands out to me is when somebody has the passion for their work, for what they do, in which it actually, no matter what stage they're at in their career, it lights them up to connect with people. And so you and I have both witnessed this when we go to like a presentation and like the speakers are just as excited to talk to people as the people watching the presentation. And like that's always super cool because it's like, well, we all have a lot that we can learn from one another. And it's like different lessons and different contexts.
Yeah.
But the more that we connect, the more that I mean the industry thrives, people thrive. It's just more rewarding. So I kind of want to talk about the Evolve conference that we both attended. I'm curious to if there's anything that having learned about it at the conference that you changed your mind on, or any of like the nuggets that they dropped that you've kind of dove deeper down into.
So I think this ties in really nicely to what we're talking about already today. I think I started with a business coach prior to that. I think we spoke about that in person at the conference. And he was already telling me to lean into my personality, right? And to be myself. And I think there's always this hesitation for most people when they don't want to show their full personality online because they're worried about judgment and how they're going to be perceived, right? But I think after the conference, it really re-solidified that for me and made it very evident that I was doing the right stuff, and like it made me lean into that more. Because all of them are, being themselves and their true selves, like authentically and unapologetically, right? So it made me realize that like a lot of these people have been successful, whatever they deem success, right? But they've been successful by being themselves. They've been successful by showing their personality, by networking with people that are like-minded, by doing the best they can to, provide their service or to make a difference. So for me, I think it's just a matter of like I am trying to just be myself and talk to a specific audience. I think that's the biggest thing too, is I was trying to talk to everyone. But when it comes to media and when it comes to even like personal training or your business, you're not trying to talk to everybody, right? Like you kind of have to hone in on who you want to speak to. And that's why you're going to get some haters. You're going to get some people that don't agree with you because you're not speaking to them necessarily per se, but they might see it that you are. And that's why it's so good to just brush it off, because somebody might come across your post and give you a tough time for it, but you're like, well, that's okay. You don't have to like it, right?
Hmm.
But I think it's just a matter of like you should be able to be authentically yourself and be okay with putting yourself out there and just like lean into your quirks, lean into your strengths. And as long as it lines up with your mission and your values, like then just run with it, right? Like I used to always try to not be as funny before. And I think because I always thought that I had to be more serious and like I had to like take it seriously because it's like it's serious, it's fitness, right? But since I've been more like joking and since I've just been having more fun, people can tell, man. Like people can tell if you're having a good time, if it's content that makes you like happy to talk about, and like if you genuinely love doing what you're doing. So I would say for like just any kind of advice for anybody listening to this, if they're at a bit of a halt, right? If they're wanting to get into social media, but they don't know how, and they feel like they're at a bit of a block, just start posting and honestly do a why video, right? If you haven't made any videos at all, it's going to be really uncomfortable, but lean into it. Talk about your story, talk about yourself and who you want to help. That opens up so many doors, right? And when somebody comes to your page, you could pin it, they can see that video, right? They can see what you're all about, the struggles that you've had. It makes you relatable, right? Like just lean into that and show them that you're a person. I think we often get pedestaled as trainers, like that we just eat spinach and we drink water and we like run 10K a day. But I'm like, no, not a lot of us don't even run. But so I think it's just a matter of like you have to be able to understand that people want to be related to and people want to see the vulnerability too. They don't want to just see like the tough outer shell. So you have to show the vulnerability for people to want to work with you and for people to want to talk to you.
Yeah, completely agree. That's like my bread and butter. I mean, if you go back through my podcast episodes, I used to do this question at the end where I'd be like, if you could give one piece of advice to someone on how to live their most authentic life in the fullest way possible, it was something along those lines, what would it be? And so
Hmm.
I'd have like dozens of people giving me sort of like their advice on how to sort of like be themselves and be fulfilled. And it was always interesting because the reason I would ask that question in a lot of cases was kind of figure out if somebody was giving me the real answer or the answer that they thought that I wanted to hear. And this isn't a dig or a judgment or anything. It's just an observation. It's just my introverted nature. I ask these questions. I'm asking them for specific reasons. And so I learned that like something that a lot of people truly, really struggle with in this industry, especially because of the nature of a lot of people's entry into the industry, is being themselves. Because, and I was listening to like Andrew Coates was recently a guest on a podcast. I forget the name of the podcast, but it was a popular one. If anybody's curious, they can send me a DM and I'll send the episode directly to him. But in that episode, they were talking about how so many of the people in the industry are very extreme. And something that kind of stood out to me, because I'm very similar to that, is that the host was talking about how she can't just like have one chip. Like if she has one chip, she's all of a sudden having like she said like something like 9 bags of chips. Now I think that was an over exaggeration, but it was just like I understood the intensity of it all. Um, because a lot of people, and especially in the fitness industry, we're kind of like we're either going to do something to the very best of our ability or we're not going to do it at all. So if we are trying to be a power lifter, we are going to get just as much volume as we can if it kills us, or we're not going to power lift. We're just going to skip. And with a lot of people that pursue jujitsu, they're going to train 9 days a week, even if it like debilitates them and they can hardly move after, or they're just going to quit. And that is kind of that is part of the struggle. And then it's always like you're having to prove yourself, having to prove yourself, having to prove yourself. And you're always looking at your peers. What are your peers doing? And it's like, if you get the impression that a peer is like further along in the journey, then you're like, oh man, I need to be doing that. Or if like somebody starts a podcast and it's like, I need to start a podcast, or somebody gets a pink shirt, I need to get a pink shirt. And it's always this like comparison, comparison, comparison. And when we are really able to hone in on like who are we and like what do we have to offer, it makes everything just so much lighter.
Yeah.
Like it's so much easier to make connections and it's so much easier to relate to clients and it's so much easier to like stay the course through the ebbs and flows of the economics of it all. Like everybody, no matter what stage, is going to have a little busy period and a quiet period. Whether they have like a really solid referral network, whether they're using Facebook ads, no matter what methods that they're doing, is going to go up and down and up and down. And if they are relying on their impression of other people for their own self-worth, it's going to be a bad time. But if they are relying on just their own journey for their self-worth, it's going to be so much better for them. And so just simply the fact that not only are you experiencing that for yourself, but you're also finding ways to empower others to kind of follow on that quest, I think is super important because it essentially keeps people in the industry longer and helps them to be happier. But I'm gonna throw a curveball at you because I
Got
like
it.
to kind of layer in. I like to kind of know what else is going on. So
Devil's advocate. Let's do it.
for myself, the reason why I make this such an all-encompassing podcast is because there's so much more to life than work. There is so much more to life than training. So for me, when I am, and this background is appropriate for what I'm about to talk about. When I'm like in a mental rut, I go on what I call as a vision quest. And when it's a vision quest, I can go anywhere. It doesn't, there are no budget constraints. I could go to Mill Creek Ravine and walk for like 10 kilometers and think about stuff. But in the best case scenario, I'll probably go to like Kananaskis or Jasper or Banff. Usually not Banff because it's too touristy, but and I'll just go for a really long walk, basically until like I can't feel my feet anymore, and then I'll sit until I can feel my feet, and then I'll go back. And during that time, I'll listen to audiobooks. I'll listen to friends' podcasts. I find more value in listening to a friend's podcast than in more of like a mainstream podcast because it's just there's just more tangible, like they're on their journey. They haven't, they're still on their way there. It's the production value isn't so high that they're so filtered and like edited that you're missing out on like some really valuable moments. So when it's a friend's podcast, it's like, okay, they had a bad day while they were recording that, but these are the lessons that they learned. And then the next episode is like, oh man, they're on fire today. This was a good day. And they're recording this, and these are the lessons that they learned. And I find a lot of great value in that. So now I'm curious, what kinds of things do you do for your life to kind of balance things out? Do you go on vision quests like me, or do you do something else?
I like Vision Quest, and I can tell that you're a gamer because of that reference, so that totally makes sense. Um, so for me personally, I'm still trying to find a work-life balance, and I'll say that because I think that's something that I still tend to struggle with. I'm very much a person where I am very invested in my work, and I will just get very, very focused on it, and that's not a bad thing per se, but it does get very life-consuming. So I've done lots of life coaching. I worked with a life coach probably about 2 years. We just finished up, so that was honestly amazing, and I would advise that to anybody at any point in time. It doesn't matter where you're at, but finding somebody to teach you skills on how to set boundaries with everybody else, but also with yourself. That's huge because it's very easy to just keep working and working and working as a business owner. Like the list never technically ends. You could finish a whole list of stuff and then you could think of another 10 things to do. And that's just the art of this business, especially when you're trying to get things done. So I think for me, the biggest thing that's really brought me like solitude is disconnecting every now and then. So I'd be like you too. If I have a period of time where my life is a little bit chaotic and my external stressors are high, I will go away for the weekend or something, or I will just try to like disconnect. And that helps me have a lot of time to reflect. I think we're so caught up and often very connected to everything. Not that that's a bad thing, right? I think it's good to be connected with people that are like-minded, but I do think that there is definitely a factor to having just some time where you're detached from it and
Hmm.
some time where you can be alone with your thoughts. And for a lot of people, that's really scary, right? Having some time alone with your thoughts, but you need to be able to sit there with your thoughts and think about things that are uncomfortable, especially if you're going through some stuff where you need to have time to work through it all. I think there's a lot of utility in having some time where you journal, where you do some breathing work, and you just have some time to figure out what's actually important to you and your values, right? I think that's a big thing is oftentimes we get so caught up in the external things around us, like our job, social media, friends, family, right? We start doing things for other people. So I think we need to remember, like, kind of like what we spoke about earlier in this podcast too. We have to always remember that, like, this is our journey, and what we want to do is what we should be doing. So I think it's just a matter of like again having some time to yourself where you can do that. And I wouldn't say that it always needs to be this like crazy vacation where you're driving away for 3 days. Like you mentioned before, finding your favorite trail to go hiking on. Um, I like to play video games with my friends sometimes. So if I have some time where I can game a little bit and detach, as long as all my work stuff is done, then I'll do that. If I want to go see a movie, I'll do that, like whatever. But I think it's about finding a good work-life balance. And overall, you got to see your work capacity is like a battery, right? So your battery will generally drain more over time. So it's a matter of like, okay, well, what things can help me refill my battery and charge me up again? So then that way I'm actually able to give that said effort to these tasks again. And for us, it ties into our clients, it ties into podcasting, it ties into our content, right? People can tell that you're burnt out. I think we often think that we're really good at being able to hide it, but people can tell, especially if you've in-person clients, they can tell that you're tired. You come in one day and you're exhausted, you didn't get any sleep. They'll be like, "Huh, you seem off today." And it happens with me all the time, and I'm like, "Oh man, is that obvious?" So yeah, it's just a matter of like, hey, when you can get to a point where you're able to understand and see it in yourself that you need to pull back a little bit, it's good. And the biggest thing too is like give yourself some grace, right? Like I think a lot of people are really hard on themselves, and myself included, right? If I take any time off, especially before, I would like be really upset with myself and be like, I shouldn't be taking this time off. I should be like grinding and working, like the business owner mindset. But as soon as I saw it as like, you have this battery, it makes it so much easier, right? If you just use your phone until it dies, we didn't charge it. I'm like, you wouldn't have a phone to use. Like
Mhm.
eventually you have to have a point where you're plugging your phone back in and you're letting it recharge. Like, I mean, your social battery and your like productive battery should be no different.
So I have a follow-up question that I'm curious about. I wonder who are like some of the people that you go to when you just need somebody to talk to or somebody to hang out with, and it's like non-work related, just like your pillars in life.
So I would say that I have a roommate, so I can definitely lean on him. He's been really a really good constant in my life. So if I'm going through stuff, he's really good at just like listening and hearing me out because I'm very much like a verbal processor. So I'll tend to just speak. Um, and then I'm very lucky to have a lot of other good friends too. I'd say girlfriend wise, like I'm very lucky to have her to talk to as well. And then just like my family, obviously, like I know I don't see them a ton, but I am fortunate that if I need them, they're there. So
Hmm.
if I were to call them and be like, hey, I'm going through some stuff, I need you guys, right? Then they'll be there for me. But I think end of the day too, I also realize that it's good to have some time where you're kind of by yourself working through some of this stuff too, because as we get older, and I think people in general tend to be very, very heavily influenced by external things. So I think if you're going through a conflict or if you're going through a bit of like a personal battle with something, you need to be able to figure out what you want to do yourself as well. Because if you're getting too many external opinions, I think that that will also drive the decision-making process as well. And it might not even be something that you align with per se, but it might be something that just gives you an answer and a solution. So I think it's important to talk to people that you really trust. And it's important to get feedback and it's important to like just get it off your chest, which is why I think it's great to have like a life coach or like a therapist, sorry, because then
Hmm.
that's it's an unbiased opinion. When you're talking to them, you're paying for their time. They're, they're obviously very skilled in whatever they're doing and they're able to give you unbiased advice, which is really helpful because somebody else you're talking to could be giving you a biased opinion, which isn't going to be helpful for you, or they're completely detached from it and they don't care the outcome of your or whatever you do, right? So I think it's important to speak to people that are like going to be in your corner, even if that means that you're paying for their time. Um, I think if you could talk to them and get some perspective or some tools, even, then that's helpful.
That's awesome. There's a couple things that I can branch off from there. So one of them was when I made the shift from my prior career, which was in a warehouse, into fitness. Part of that was realizing like how fast time was going. I was like, wow, like we're back to this same time, new year. Like the years just cycle and cycle and cycle. And I was coming up to 5 years with that company. And I was like, there's got to be more to life. Like, I don't think this is how I'm going to ride out my years. I think there's more to this and I need to find it. And as I was doing that, I was realizing, and also, why am I not spending more time making memories? Like, I'm getting older. And so then I started to kind of like subliminally create this sort of like framework structure for life, whether I was like truly struggling financially or doing so well that like it was hard to get people into my calendar because it was so full. I decided that I needed to kind of like set boundaries to prioritize family and like maybe a small cluster of friends. I would love to include all friends, but that would fill up the calendar and I got to eat. But essentially by doing that, then I started to regularly like I've been calling my parents like almost every day for the last like 8 years, which sounds ridiculous to some, but it's been awesome for me. And a lot of like for perspective, if somebody's like, well, why would you do that? Don't you have better things to do? And I'm thinking about it, I'm like, well, when my parents were my age, they couldn't call their parents. At least not both of their parents. Because both my mom and my dad, their father each passed away when they were quite young. Like for my mom, she was 10. For my dad, I think he was like 18. And so I'm like thinking about that. I'm like, why would I ever take that for granted? And like my heart goes out to anybody that's like missing those conversations. And I'm kind of a believer that like there's still energy out there. Like you can kind of still have like spiritual conversations and stuff like that, however you believe that to come into play. But I started to realize like if we don't block out time for that kind of stuff, like it doesn't happen. And when you talked about the what your roommate can offer you as far as like a sounding board and just like somebody to talk to, I have like been solo on my own for like a decade or so, but before that, I had like the best roommate you could possibly have. He's still one of my closest friends and I could talk to him about anything. And he was actually an in-person client with me when I started my career in the fitness industry. He helped me kind of get through a speed bump when the first private gym I worked at closed, and he stayed with me and still hired me, whereas I lost a lot of other clients because of that move. But just a solid guy. And then he wound up moving to a town like 5 hours north, and we don't see each other as much. And I was like, wow, that really affects me. And so I started to realize like how much of an impact on like our perception of ourself, our self-worth, our productivity that like one or two people can make, and just how essential it is to kind of structure in those times. And so in the past, I've like been like, okay, well, like this person is so important that I'll plan out a visit. I don't visit him enough. But like a couple of years ago, I drove up to where he lives, middle of nowhere, northern Alberta, and it was worth it because we got to have that quality time. And despite the fact, like I could have come up with a laundry list of things that I could have done as a personal trainer, online coach, all these other things that I do. But it's just like this all ends one day. Like we are going to run out of time. It doesn't matter if we are, it's not a race. It's like we are going to run out of days and we need to collect these moments with all these people. And I think that's one of my bigger lessons that I've learned. And to touch on your topic of life coach, counselor, therapist, I've shared this in past episodes, but I don't think I could possibly share it enough. In 2020-ish, when a lot of us were probably having existential crises with closed gyms and all that stuff, I definitely hit kind of a breaking point where I just like I was lacking my sense of purpose. I couldn't do what I loved. I couldn't train people at the gym. And like there was so much uncertainty with the future. I was confident in myself long term, but I didn't feel good short term. And so I actually got linked up with a counselor who I could do online sessions with. And it's profound the positive impact that it had on just my self-reflection of my career up to that point. Because basically, it took Now, if anybody's heard me guest on a podcast, they're gonna totally know what I'm talking about. But it took me like 2.5 sessions with this guy to just share my origin story. To just like dump everything. And because there's a lot of like there's some roller coaster moments where like maybe one of my friends knows all the stress I went through and the rest of the industry has no idea. And like just the amount of like risk, the amount of emotion, the amount of self-doubt, the amount of like insecurity,
Mhm.
just feeling like the world was crashing down and that was all bottled up. And so I talked to the counselor and got it off my chest and he was able to kind of relay, he was, wow, that's awesome. Because like I'm in the industry. Like I didn't leave. That didn't take me out. And I think most likely everybody who is in the industry could have a conversation like that with somebody, whether it's a professional or just like a close friend who's just a really good listener. It could be profound and it might save their career
Mhm.
because a lot of people they don't take time for that. They're like, no, work more, work more, work more, work more, and then boom, crash. And then they're a paramedic, which is fine, totally fine. Or they go into real estate, also fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they become a plumber, something totally different. And all these things are totally fine. There's times when I'm like, it'd be pretty cool to be one of those careers. But if their intention is to be a coach or a trainer long term, then hopefully they have that moment where like, okay, I'm just gonna like stop doing stuff for the sake of having time to do these other things because those things that I stopped doing are gonna be there when I get back to them. So my next question for you is what are your goals for yourself over the next 2 years? And this can be personal goals or this could be professional goals.
Okay. So I'd say personal goals. I still want to make sure that I'm focusing on trying to get a better work-life balance and make sure that I'm spending more time with people. I found when I was getting really focused on my work, the first thing that went was quality time with people around me. And I didn't do that as a way to try to harm anybody or put anybody, make them feel bad. It was more just something that I was doing to try to focus on what was ahead of me. And I think what I'm realizing, and you spoke on it too, is how important experiences are and family and friends. Those things are something that we're going to carry with us forever. And I think it's so important to make sure that you're making time for those things. So for me going forward, I'm trying to ensure that even if my life appears to be chaotic, I'm trying to make sure that I'm still making time for people that are important to me. So I'm doing those things, but then also I tend to be a very anxious person by default. So I'm trying to ensure that I'm always finding ways to be able to self-regulate better, to calm myself down, self-soothe better, so I'm not projecting it upon people. Because everybody has those moments where they're super hangry or where they're frustrated with something work-wise, and they just kind of yell at the person that they see, right? Because they're angry. But I think there's a lot of things to be said about somebody that's able to control their emotions, even in high stress situations. And I think for me, I'm still trying to find that point where like I'm not having, not that I, again, not that I lose my mind on people, obviously, but I still want to be able to get to a point where like I am at peace, right? And I'm
Mhm.
very okay with just how things are. And I think it sounds really cliche, right? But I think for me, like it's this journey of being in peace and this journey of being fulfilled and truly happy with the path that I'm on and not being bothered about what people around me are saying or not saying. And I mean that because I think you're going to either get the validation and the affirmation they're doing good things, but if you're also not getting that, you need to still be doing things that you want to be doing regardless. And I think that is something that has to tie into your purpose, right? If you're doing something that you know that you love doing and you're meant to do, then you need to be doing it regardless. So, and that ties into people that want to start their own business. They're wanting to take on a future endeavor. Maybe they're wanting to even like ask somebody out. It's like any of those things. You got to be able to like again just lean into it, and regardless of what happens, just know that you tried and gave it an honest effort, right? And then I'd say for business wise, I'm really wanting to continue growing my business. So Right now, I'm working with a business coach and I'm wanting to really grow my online business more. I love in person, but I do find that obviously in person is very time consuming. So I'm wanting to tap more into the online space. The biggest thing for me over this next, I guess, couple of years is to have more systems in place. So it makes my life significantly easier. My clients are seeing better progress because I have more systems and I'm more organized, right? And then in turn, just making it a little bit more scalable. So then that way I get to a point where I'm able to maybe hire somebody on, have them work for me, have me teach them my systems and my ways that I do things. And then I'm also wanting to get into education. I have a really cool opportunity that I won't say much about right now at this point in time later this year to get my first little taste of teaching, but I'm not going to say what it is. But I'm really wanting to dive into that more, branch out into that more, and continue to just try to make a difference and take on trainers that are brand new and teach them again the idea of being more intentful, getting better at like problem solving, troubleshooting, and overall just making it so that way they don't feel so lost and helpless when they're working with clients. I feel like oftentimes school doesn't prepare them for that. So I want to give a lot of actionable items that people can take and just like work on and really hone in on their skills. Yeah, and then as far as just other business stuff, I'd say just continue doing my thing. I'm actually rebranding my podcast, so I'm very honored to be doing it with a good friend and client of mine, and we're going to be rebranding the podcast. So I won't say names of that yet either. But we're going to be co-hosting that, and I'm wanting to just make it a little bit more encompassing. It's grown obviously over time, so I see it as being something that's essential just to show how much has changed and what I want to accomplish with it now. Um, yeah, and then get more involved in teaching and there's other stuff I want to do too, but I won't get too much into that stuff. But
Totally. No, it's cool because it's like even when you just kind of like tease the different things, the number of times I've had people on the show where they kind of tease a thing that's coming up, and then it actually happens, and I put them back on the show, and I'm like, "Hey, remember that thing that you like did the spoiler for? Now talk about it because you're doing it."
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Um,
No, I'm very honored. So
One of the things that I was curious to dig into, I'm such a curious guy, I keep saying that, but when you're making time for things like you talked about work-life balance, like what's your routine for that? Do you like put a day on the calendar? Do you block out the time? Do you like add their email to the Google event and everything like that?
I'm very like I'm a colored calendar guy.
Yeah.
So when I'm trying to like schedule out my week, I have colors appropriate for certain things that I'm doing. Anything blue in my calendar is usually like pleasure or it's going to be something to do with my friends or family, right? Just something that's like life related. Um, and then other colors are just, around certain tasks that I'm doing. But I've found people might find that insane, but I've found that just having a schedule and having a calendar that I'm following keeps me way more on task. And I'm going into my day with a plan.
Hmm.
Like it's like the workout, right? If you went into the gym with no workout at all every day, you'd be like, okay, well, what am I doing here? I don't see a calendar or schedule being anything different. It's like when you're looking at your week, it's like, oh, like what does my week look like? Where are my downtimes in this week? And when can I fit in more time for myself? And that's why I think it's so important to find things that really fill your cup on a different level and different scale because you're not going to have the same amount of time every day, right? So there's going to be some days where you have half an hour. So maybe that half an hour is a walk, right? There's going to be certain days where you have a whole evening free. Maybe that's a time to invite a buddy over or make a drive somewhere and see a friend, right? Or there's going to be a time where maybe you have a weird day gap, right? Maybe you go meet up with a friend for a workout. So there's going to be a lot of times where like you have to just find things that you value and associate those things to that value and make it work with your schedule. Because as a business owner, but even just working a regular schedule too, if you're working like a classic 8 to 5, you're at work from, 7 till 5, or you're not home till 6 o'clock. It's like, okay, well, you're not going to have that much time for things that you really enjoy. So I think for me, it's just a matter of like really expanding my horizons and figuring out, okay, well, what things actually do make me happy? And what things do I really look forward to doing all the time, every time that I do them. And luckily, fitness is one of those things for me. So I'm super fortunate that I love my job. and I get to talk to people like you, and I get to make content. I get to do things that I'm really passionate about, and not everybody has that luxury, right? But even so, it's still important to have things that are not attached to fitness. Because if you're doing things that are constantly attached to fitness, you're gonna find ways, if you haven't already, you will, but how you could find it and scale it and apply it to your business, right? You're gonna be like, oh, this is kind of cool, even though this is like not attached to my business currently right now. How could this be? So it's important to have things that are just aligned with you, right? Like for me, I love live music and I love music in general. So I like will a new album comes out, I'll listen to the album, like I look for live shows to go to. I'll book the night off to go. Because for me, those are experiences that I will have forever. Like love live music. So for me, it's like I want to be going and doing these things. So I think for anybody listening, it's just like don't be afraid to calendar your week out, schedule your week out, even if you look insane, right? Having your everything blocked off, even meals or water if you need to, if you find that you forget to eat your meals, right? And then schedule your downtime, right? Okay, I have this full day of work after, but then in the evening, I'm going to allocate myself an hour to play video games, right? Or, okay, I have some time in the morning the next day. Maybe you go for a walk to start your day off or something like that, right? I think it's just a matter of like planning better and like that'll set you up for success better long term.
And I'm totally aligned with that. Like, I like the expression where it's like, if I'm saying yes to this, what am I saying no to? And by putting everything in my calendar, like for me, I do work for at least three different businesses throughout the year, sometimes more when I'm doing like some contracts and stuff. And so a lot of people are booking into my calendar via various different platforms. And so I have to have everything on the calendar so I don't get double booked from like one person from like Wales and another person from like Michigan or something. And so with that said, I've realized that if I don't actually like schedule in like the walks with friends and the coffee meetups and just like a good chunk of time where I drive out to my parents, spend some time, have a meal, and then go back home, then it won't happen because it'll just be otherwise, I'll be a yes man. I like helping people, and if I felt that I had time, I would give that time to people. And so when I block out the time that I need to celebrate a niece's birthday or to spend time with my brothers, or if my sister-in-law ever needed help with anything, like if I block out that time, then it happens. Then I become a reliable person. And in such, if like my in-person people talk to me or even my online people, because I do a lot of Zoom calls with some of my online people, and they were like, yeah, you seem like energetic. Like they're gonna benefit from that. And I would only be energetic if I followed through with the non-work activities. Now, I have a little mini question, which shouldn't take too much to answer, but I'm curious, have you ever done jujitsu?
No. My one client though, he does do jujitsu. And I've had interest in martial arts actually, but I haven't done anything myself. I was considering doing Muay Thai before, but I haven't started it. Honestly, the work got busy, but that's not really an excuse per se. But no, I haven't partaken in any kind of martial arts before.
So the reason I ask is there's a lot of the things that you talked about with like anxiousness and with just like self-reflection and sense of identity, sense of purpose, all those things. And I found jujitsu to help with everything. And it always feels like I'm like trying to get people to drink the Kool-Aid. But a lot of the people in my life who I relate to on a very like core level have also resonated with jujitsu for that same reason. So if you ever feel the inclination to try it out, just come on down to Frontline and join us there. Or also, my friend Kenny Buller has a gym on the West End called Brave, where you could try out a class at his facility.
Sure.
But just basically, I like tossing it out there because it's kind of like the gift that keeps on giving is people either do jujitsu or they do pickleball, and I'm on team jujitsu. So, but I've just, it was profound the impact that it had on my headspace, like mentally. and just like how much I just do not care what other people think of me because I do jujitsu, which seems so bizarre because I'm like, well, wouldn't I still care? I'm like, no, because like you go and you practice this thing where people are essentially practicing killing you and you're fine. And so then when you go out into the world and you encounter all these like obstacles and just like weird conversations and things taken out of context online and things where you're like, is that person talking about me? And things where it's like, am I good enough? Am I enough for the world?
Yeah.
Jiu-jitsu makes that all just settle down. And then it's like, wow, okay, now what's important? All right, we got family, friends, livelihood, sense of purpose, rinse, repeat, get after it. And it's like, and when it comes to health, all the health aspects become that much more important because it's like, if I don't want somebody to kill me, I have to be strong and my nutrition has to be in check and my sleep has to be good and I might actually have to moderate things like alcohol and because like there is a very distinct correlation between a person's ability to recover when they're a heavy drinker whereas if they just don't drink at all when it comes to jujitsu because you can kind of fake it till you make it with like strength training but you cannot when somebody is like coming after you and it's like your heart rate is just like maxing out and you have to defend yourself and you have to like push people off of you or like hold a person still like all these different like intricacies of jujitsu. And the funny thing as I wrap this up is that if you go back into my episodes there is at least two episodes where I said I never do jujitsu. I'm not, no, it's not for me. I just cheer on my friends and then here I am doing it. And I wouldn't say I'm like the best at it, but I like to encourage other people to try it out and experience the benefits. And like I don't even if a person went to one class and hated it and never came back, that's okay. That's just at least they tried and they knew. But with that said, I won't take up too much of your time. We will wrap up this episode, and I just want to thank you for joining me on the show and sharing your story.
Of course, man. It was a pleasure. I hope that all the listeners took some stuff away from this, even if there's people that are wanting to get into the social media game or even get into training and they feel like they're in their own heads. So just start and be you. That's it.
Totally.